Hello and welcome to Cask Theology, a channel about theology and beer. Today's topic is not beer itself, but all the rules and regulations surrounding how you can sell it in a pub or elsewhere. I'm going to try and make it as interesting as possible, unless of course you're into all that legal stuff. Either way, grab yourself a drink and get comfy as we learn some of the rules and regulations surrounding UK beer. Please do stick around until the end, as I've got a couple of weird facts about drinking laws of the UK to share with you all. But first off, let's start with the history of it all. Licensing in the UK was pretty much a necessity because, well, we love us some alcohol. Unfortunately, a bit too much. But it was not beer, but gin that forced our government to start slapping regulations on alcohol. The gin craze of the 1700s turned us into a nation that was near enough sozzled daily, and this was because A, gin was priced so low, B, available pretty much everywhere, and C, anyone could buy it at any age. Naturally, a constantly drunk population leads to all sorts of problems, so after a disastrous first attempt to curb the nation's taste with taxes, the government came up with the idea of limiting the sale of booze to places that held a licence for it. This move actually did help to sober us all up a bit, and that was it. Licensing laws were here to stay. The laws we have today were implemented fairly recently, in this century in fact. They were designed to modernise them for the 21st century and make them easier and more streamlined. Previously, you'd need licences for selling beer, having entertainment, or being an entertainment venue like, say, being a theatre, or having a band in your pub for a night. You'd need one for selling beer on a premises like a pub, or off a premises like an off-licence, or a liquor store for all my American viewers. Pressure was being put on the government as well to stop a phenomenon known as binge drinking. Pubs back then had got very strict opening and closing times, some of which had been the same since the early 1900s. This meant, of course, people were chucking as many beers down their neck as humanly possible before the pub shut, and that led to entire cities' worth of drunks being kicked out all at the same time, which of course leads to problems. Enter the new licensing laws of 2003, which are the ones that we use today. Let's go through them. The first big difference to the old ways was the scrapping of the many licences that were around and replacing them with 3 new ones which covered all the aspects of the old ones. These were the premises licence, the personal licence and the club premises certification, all of which we'll go into now. Let's start with your premises licence. This licence is assigned to a place, such as a pub or a restaurant or a cafe or even just a patch of ground. This outlines what is allowed to happen in that particular place. It details your opening and closing times, what sort of entertainment you're allowed to have, and of course it allows booze to be sold there. There is no on-licence or off-licence anymore, because they're both covered in this licence. However, while a pub may get a licence to sell beer on and off a premises, a shop that sells beer will have a stipulation that says any beer they sell must be consumed off the premises. To get a premises licence, a business or a person must apply for it, and they must go through quite a few checks and filters to be awarded one, which will tell them what they can and can't do on that premises. But just because the building is allowed to sell beer, that doesn't mean that you can just go ahead and sell beer there. And that is where the second type of licence comes in, the personal licence. The personal licence, as you'd expect, is assigned to a person, not a place. Someone with one of these licences is the person who authorises the sale of alcohol in the place that has the premises licence. Now, to get one of these, you have to do a riveting course about licensing law, pass an exam, and then get subjected to several checks to make sure that you've not been naughty in your past. The final type of licence pertains to clubs, where the line between selling beer and the members owning the stock gets a bit wibbly wobbly. Because they are often run by committees, and because they're not technically selling alcohol, they can apply for a club premises certification. This is very similar to a premises licence, but you don't need to have someone with a personal licence to authorise the sale of booze, since the members are only paying to replenish the club's stash, which they kind of already own in a weird way. So, once you've got all your licences in order, it's time to start selling some beers, but only as long as you've followed the licensing objectives. The licensing authority, which is generally a county council, will grant licences as long as the applicant can make sure that they can fulfil 4 objectives that the authorities and the licensee are legally required to uphold. These are as follows. Number 1. The prevention of crime and disorder. Number 2. Public safety. Number 3. The prevention of public nuisance. And number 4. The protection of children from harm. Now, Scotland has got a 5th one, which is protecting and improving public health, and Northern Ireland has got a 6th, which is the fair treatment of stakeholders. Most of these are self-explanatory. Stopping kids from getting drunk and the sale of stolen goods or drugs in a bar are 2 easy examples, and as for the other 2, well, preventing violent behaviour and ensuring that somebody's fun night out isn't going to be disturbing the neighbours at 2 in the morning are the sort of things they target. When a premises applies for a licence, all these are taken into consideration by the licensing body and the police, who will eventually have the final say on what the premises can or can't do on its licence, and they will consider where it is, what type of business it is, and so on and so forth. The allowances they give to an inner city pub will be different to that of a rural village pub in a residential area. A personal licence holder will be expected to uphold all these objectives as well. Now, a place can have more than one personal licence holder, but one of them must be assigned as a DPS. This does not mean damage per second like in an MMO, but it stands for Designated Premises Supervisor. The DPS is usually the general manager or tenant of a pub, as this needs to be someone who runs the day-to-day business of things. They will need to be able to show that they are taking steps to uphold these rules, using things like, say, a Challenge 21 policy to prevent kids getting a hold of booze, CCTV to prevent naughty things going on, or having measures in place to stop a band playing so loud that you can hear them on Mars. The book stops with the DPS. If there is an issue with licensing, then they're the person that the police will come looking for first. But that is not to say that the other personal licence holders get off scot-free. If they've been up to naughty stuff, they can be investigated too. Because they're supposed to be in charge of making sure the rules are being followed, they can get some pretty harsh fines or even jail time for it. One of the biggest changes with the new rules concerned opening times, and all the old enforced closing times were completely scrapped, allowing for 24-hour opening. The news of course had a field day with this, naturally, but in reality there was actually very few places that have a 24-hour licence, and these tend to be places like hotels. This is down of course to the application for the premises licence, where both the council and police will look at the application and give it a yay or nay. Some pubs will now close at 11, others will close at 12. Some will close earlier during the week, and they might stay open longer at weekends. Nightclubs, of course, may have licensed hours from between, I don't know, say 8 PM to 5 AM or something. And this is what the government was after, a staggered set of closing times to prevent swarms of sozzled patrons spilling out into the street at the same time. There are, of course, times when you might want to organise something in a place that doesn't have a licence, or say you want to hold a charity event with a bar and live music in, say, I don't know, a car park. Or maybe you're actually running a pub that's going to host a wedding reception and you want to stay open a bit longer and have a DJ. Well, in cases like this, you can actually apply for something called a temporary event notice. Again, these get vetted by the council and police, but if allowed, then these allow you to go ahead so long as there are no objections to it. Finally, let's get on to some fun facts. Fact 1. Being drunk is illegal. Sort of. So let's clarify this a bit. Getting drunk is not punishable by law, but serving someone who has had too many beers is. Serving a drunk person can get you fined and in trouble with the police, and this is covered under the public nuisance and public safety objectives. So by law, us barfolk have to refuse service to those who are drunk. This of course can get awkward, but the licensee has a duty to make sure the objectives are met. So if we think you've had too much, that's it, I'm sorry. No more beers for you. Also, it's not illegal to be wandering around the streets with a beer in hand as well. Some cities have non-drinking zones where alcohol is banned, but many is the time that I've seen a load of lads fishing in the river that run through a city centre with a couple of cans in tow. Fact 2. Kids can drink actually. It is enshrined in law that kids can actually drink at home from the age of 5 under adult supervision. Another little quirk of the law is that anyone from the age of 16 is allowed to drink a standard cider, lager or glass of wine as long as it is accompanied with a full meal and of course supervised. Now while this is in fact law, don't expect many premises to allow it. After all, when it gets around that 16-year-olds are drinking in your pub when the legal limit is 18, it's best not to take any chances. Once that rumour mill gets started, it's very difficult to stop it, So a lot of places have it either in house rules or company policy that they don't honour this rule, as the penalties for serving under 18s can be pretty harsh for the poor bar person that served that drink, not to mention the reputational damage. Fact 3. That Tom Scott video was in fact perfectly legal. So, if you're a fan of his, you might remember a certain Tom Scott video where he sold beer on a hovercraft. Now, I looked up the licensing exceptions in Article 173 of the Licensing Act, and yep, he was right. Although some of the exceptions he didn't mention is that you also don't need a licence to sell beer if you're on an international journey, if you're on a premises that's under occupation by the royal forces of the Crown, or at any of the royal palaces, which means that Queen Elizabeth could sell you a crate of bud at Buckingham Palace for a decent price, no problems. Although, how you get to that point in your life, well, that would be a heck of a story, wouldn't it? Fact 4. You might get ID'd for alcohol-free beer. Now, this does sound a bit bonkers, but with the rise of great-looking, great-tasting alcohol-free beer, wine and spirits, this has become much more of a thing in recent years. Now, even though legally, if these beers contain 0.5% or less alcohol, they are classed as alcohol-free, you might still get asked for ID. What's the reason behind that? Well, it's similar to Fun Fact 2. These beers look so real nowadays that someone across the room might think it's the real deal. So, just to make sure, some places ask for ID to make sure that they can say, yep, we're not selling beer to underage kids. It's all fine. In any case, if you are in the UK and you look under 21, do take some ID with you. And if you're not from the UK, take your passport everywhere, because that is the one form of ID that we can accept in pubs. No problems. Well, that's it from me. Hopefully you've learned something today. Do leave a like if you like this, and share it to anyone you might think is interested. Until then, do go grab yourself a nice legal drink and keep asking yourself questions, and I'll see you next time.